Welcome to the first episode of my first podcast, It Ain't Easy Being Human. Now, I wanted to do this podcast to continue the conversation from the video series, It's a Trap When Two Worlds Collide. I hope you enjoyed those videos, maybe even found them helpful, and you're here to keep the conversation going. So be sure to subscribe, like, and share, because it ain't easy being human, and if you think it's supposed to be, it's a trap. Hi, I'm Ed Green. Now, since my first book, Escape from Insanity, Illusions, and Lies, I've been using the 7-step model described in the book to help people in therapy and coaching improve the quality of their lives before it became the 7-step formula. Here's what I found out. Most people discover the emotional distress they're dealing with is often connected to choices they made or haven't made. And somewhere along the way, they walked right into a trap. The thing is, this isn't unusual. It's quite common. In fact, I believe it's part of the human experience. We question what's real instead of what we believe. And that's been happening for as long as fear's been around. And that's been for a very long time. That's what the It's a Trap series was really about, exposing this pattern of the human condition for you to see from a psychospiritual perspective and recognize it for the trap it is. I mean, let's be honest. Sometimes being human feels like trying to navigate life the way we used to take family road trips. Some of you may remember what that was like. You had paper maps, a car full of kids, and a fuse that gets shorter with every wrong turn. Meanwhile, the map is upside down, you've missed 3 exits, everybody's hungry, and somehow you're still convinced you know exactly where you're going. And if you think it should be easy, it could be a trap. But what do? We walk right into it anyway. Now, over the years of working with people, doing workshops, researching, writing, and frankly, just paying attention to life's ups and downs, I discovered something I introduced in part 5 and 6 in the It's a Trap video series. I introduced you to a pattern that's so common and universal that I believe is just part of being human. Remember? When past negative or traumatic experiences are superimposed onto the present, we believe it's happening again, still, or will happen in the future, is real. And the most fascinating part is, most of the time, we don't even realize the trap we fell into. Let me tell you what I mean. I've been a martial arts practitioner and instructor most of my adult life. Now, years ago, I was teaching a student a weapons technique that required a sudden drop from a single leg stance into a very low crouching stance. Now, as I dropped into that stance, I felt something pop in my hip. It hurt for a while, but was sore for a long time. But I assumed it would get better, so I did what anyone would do in that position. I adapted, I stretched, stayed active, kept practicing, and tried to ignore what I called a dull ache, and told myself, it'll be fine. By calling it a dull ache seemed to make it more tolerable. Now, over the next few years, the dull ache got worse. My flexibility disappeared. Eventually, I developed a limp. I convinced myself nobody noticed, but apparently everybody noticed. And people kept asking me about it. And soon, the idea of hip replacement surgery came up more and more. So finally, I went to see an orthopedic surgeon. He explained the procedure. He described cutting an incision halfway down my leg, replacing the joint, and then told me I would never be able to sit and cross my legs or do martial arts again. I think I was halfway through the parking lot before he even finished that sentence. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I wasn't reacting to what was real anymore. I was reacting to what I believe. My mind had already created a scary future. The surgery meant loss, limitation, the end of something I was really passionate about. Then who would I be? Just a therapist? And somehow that that wasn't enough. And because I believed it, it felt real. Eventually, my teacher, Master Wong, told me that Bill Wallace had hip replacement surgery. Now, if you don't know who Bill Superfoot Wallace is, look him up. Bill had taught a seminar at a school not long before that. I watched him throw fast, head-high kicks with mind-blowing speed, precision, and accuracy. I would have never guessed he had a hip replaced. I asked Master Wong if he would put me in touch with Bill, and he did. Now, Bill encouraged me to have the surgery and recommended finding a surgeon who specialized in a minimally invasive procedure. So I found such a doctor and had the surgery. Now, here's the point to all of this. The next day, I stood up for the first time after surgery, and I knew instantly what I had been calling a dull ache was pain. That's what I was expecting when I stood up, but it was gone. And what I had been calling patience was suffering. And I chose it. Not consciously, not intentionally, but I chose it because I had become so accustomed to the pain that it became normal. I told myself stories about it. I justified it, adapted to it. I built my life around it. I chose it. That's the trap. Sounds pretty insane, doesn't it? And here's the interesting thing. Many of these patterns don't begin with us. They're learned, modeled, absorbed, passed from one generation to the next, as it was for me. Now, as a high school athlete, a football player, a wrestler, and continued wrestling in the Navy, I grew up hearing, no pain, no gain. Stick it out, suck it up, push through it, keep going. That's how many of us were raised. That's what we were told men are supposed to do. The problem is, sometimes the lesson outlived the usefulness. Like a family fruitcake recipe nobody actually enjoys anymore, but every Christmas holiday, everybody gets one anyway. This is why I believe our psychology and our spirituality are inseparable, because psychology helps us understand the pattern, how beliefs form, how fears operate, how experiences shape perception. Now, spirituality asks a different question. Who are you really? And what's actually true right now? Because sometimes the greatest source of suffering isn't what's happening, it's what we believe is happening. Because if we only address the human struggle without really connecting to something deeper, we may understand ourselves better, but still be trapped. Because there's a gap between what we believe and what's real, we must choose. And when we lose connection with what's real, fear fills the space faster than street flooding after a storm. Now, fear is interesting because fear rarely walks into the room announcing, "Fear in the house." Most of the time, it sounds reasonable, protective, logical, like an overqualified inner consultant that can sound like an auctioneer auctioning off the worst case scenarios to the highest bidder. Sometimes it just says, run. And you may not even know where you're running to or running from. Now, fear doesn't always shout. Most of the time it whispers. And what it whispers sounds an awful lot like common sense. Then there's the dark invader scenario from the video series. That's always an ego favorite. Which brings us to one of the most important questions you can ask yourself. Is this an opinion, a feeling, or a fact? Because our minds are remarkably good at taking opinions and feelings and promoting them as facts. How do I know? I'll show you. Try this little experiment. Listen to yourself or somebody else when you hear, "Well, I feel like," and what follows is not a feeling, but actually a thought or an opinion and not an emotion, but often presented as a feeling, presented as a fact. Listen to yourself and let me know in the comments what you discover with this little experiment. And when you hear this, ask, is that an opinion, a feeling, or a fact? And see what happens. Now, Eventually, when you begin seeing these patterns clearly enough, you'll discover something very important. If you're trapped, you'll need a way out, an escape plan. That's exactly why the 7-step formula was created. Not as a theory, not as a motivational language, but as a practical psycho-spiritual framework and pathway designed to help people recognize, interrupt, and navigate their way free from the patterns that trap them through a process of self-discovery to restore balance between our human and spiritual nature. Awareness is important, but awareness alone without action won't always free you. We'll be talking more about the 7-step formula in upcoming episodes. But this podcast won't be limited to one pathway to the same destination. We'll explore different paths towards healing and awareness. You'll be hearing from therapists, coaches, as well as spiritual and religious perspectives and disciplines and just everyday people, all exploring different roads leading to the same place: healing, balance, self-awareness, reconnecting with who we really are beneath the conditioning. That's what I call psycho-spiritual. Before we finish today, I'd like you to consider a question. Where in your life have you become so accustomed to suffering that you started calling it normal? Where have you adapted, justified, or rationalized, or learned to live around something instead of making a choice? And if you discovered you were trapped, would you know how to escape? Now, if you'd like to learn more about the 7-step formula, the traps, upcoming workshops, coaching, psychotherapy services, and other resources to promote awareness through self-discovery, visit overcomingthisanity.com and follow this podcast, because recognizing the trap is the beginning. Learning how to find your way free is the journey. Be sure to push the alert button so you know when the next episode of It Ain't Easy Being Human comes online. In our next conversation, we're going to explore how these traps work. In the meantime, remember, life is a series of experiences connected by the choices we make, leading to the next experience. And that's what brought you here to this very moment, to choose your next experience. So choose wisely. And don't fall for it, because it could be a trap. Because it ain't easy being human. So till next time, see clearly, live freely, and love deeply.